The legal and ethical considerations of emulation, a case study of Dolphin and Yuzu. When it comes to the overarching point of discussion regarding emulation, there is a lot of ambiguity revolving around what constitutes as ethically discernible, as there are two sides of the same coin that perpetuate their reasoning for and against this enigmatic debate. One side points out that emulation is great for game preservation, as well as being a great way to experience content on a much grandiose scale, in an environment most comfortable to said user, whereas others argue it might ruin the perception and quality of said games due to technological hindrances, as well as taking away from the core experience of the native system. All of these points and then some serve to provide insights regarding the ethics of emulation, from both a personal and a professional perspective. This presentation aims to provide liaise to these points of interests. Emulation's legality is dependent on copyright laws, which provide authors the sole authority to reproduce, distribute and perform their works. In accordance with the 2020 copyright law of the United States, using emulator software to play games protected by copyright without permission may violate these rights. The doctrine of fair use emulation proponents frequently invoke the fair use doctrine, which allows limited, unrestricted use of copyrighted content for educational, scholarly, research, news reporting, teaching, and critic purposes. This side of the coin contend that emulation is permissible under the use of fair use, especially when it comes to the upholding of legacy games and supporting innovative works. On one hand, the act of emulating software to play copyrighted games without proper licensing gives rise to the several legal difficulties, particularly with reference to the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. Even though emulation is not inherently illegal in of itself, copyright holders employ them to safeguard their creations. Such bypassing is a common part of emulation, which places it in a legal limbo that can kind of be in violation of the DMCA. Though it is important to take into account, copyright law contains a fair use theory that permits limited, unrestricted use of copyrighted content for, again, scholarly, research, teaching and critic purposes. Such is the case with emulation. For some emulation activities, some of those that entail researching and learning from the source code to produce original software, this theory offers a legal foundation. Furthermore, under some circumstances, Section 1201 of the DMCA grants exemptions for specified activities like encryption research, security testing and reverse engineering. Not to mention, this section provides further clarity of what constitutes as malpractice pertaining towards this enigma, such as not circumventing technological measures, that of which control or alters access to the work protected under the designated section. What we can infer from this is that this section encompasses the notion that we should be able to learn from copyrighted technological infrastructures, albeit not with the malicious intent to alter predefined and existing architecture. Case in point, our preceding case studies, starting with Dolphin Emulator. Dolphin Emulator, known for its capability to run Nintendo GameCube and Wii games on various platforms, found itself under legal scrutiny from Nintendo. In this specific instance of the class action lawsuit between Nintendo and Dolphin's development team Kinetics, the focus is more so on Nintendo's argument against Dolphin itself for being a roadblock for Nintendo's business. Nintendo claims that the emulator violates their rights under the DMCA, specifically citing 17 USC section 1201 as stated previously. While reverse engineering is legal as per the Kinetics case, Nintendo argues that the distribution of the emulator is not. Nintendo's main argument is that the Dolphin emulator is designed solely to play Wii and GameCube games that Nintendo owns the copyrights to, and that it unlawfully circumvents the technological protection measures that control access to said games. The scope of Nintendo's cease and desist letter is limited to the use of cryptographic keys without their authorization, rather than the act of reverse engineering itself. One significant reason why Nintendo pursued legal action against Dolphin in the first place was its unsolicited use of Nintendo's proprietary ISO encryption keys. These keys were utilised by Dolphin to discern legitimate ISO formats under the ISO standard. Despite Dolphin's efforts to maintain compliance with software regulations and facilitate educational endeavours, the use of Nintendo's encryption keys crossed into legally contentious territory. This use of proprietary technology without authorization likely prompted Nintendo's legal intervention to protect its intellectual property rights. Here is a showcase of what the protruding sticking point regarding this inexplicable situation. From the screenshot demonstrated on the right, this showcases the way in which Kinetics have been able to use the aforementioned cryptography keys unbeknownst to any and all changes that have been pushed to their GitHub. The way in which these cryptographic keys work is in relation to Dolphin, and the logistical reason as to why Nintendo went after them to begin with is because during this switch case demonstrated from the enumeration of various encryption types, the corresponding hex values are used within the brackets pertaining towards the access of said enumeration types, which could be akin to the likeness of what could presumably be or the exact same hex signatures that Nintendo used in their PowerPC dev kits for the Wii to employ these same sort of checks. In a similar vein, Yuzu, an emulator for Nintendo Switch games on PC and other platforms, has drawn attention from Nintendo for copyright infringement and DMCA violations. Nintendo has also taken issue with Yuzu, in the same vein as it did with Dolphin, for once again violating copyright and the Digital Media Content Act. During this lawsuit documents, Nintendo and its representatives are accusing Yuzu of engaging in illegal activities, including the distribution of prod.keys and evading Nintendo's technological safeguards for its copyrighted games. In a similar vein to Dolphin's ISO keys, prod.keys allow for the unsolicited usage of playing Nintendo Switch games on other platforms that aren't designed for the native system. Additionally, Nintendo claims that the acts of Yuzu have seriously harmed both their company and independent game developers, such as the case of using Nintendo's SDK for indie developers. The case highlights that the value that Nintendo places on its copyright games and how, in order to stay in the good graces of its developers, Nintendo must distribute its games in an authorized and licensed manner. Nintendo further claims that it has made technological investments to protect said games and platforms from online piracy. According to the lawsuit, Nintendo claims that Yuzu have caught themselves in illegal software trafficking, with the main goal being to get over technological barriers that Nintendo have installed to prevent unauthorized users from accessing copyrighted works. By infringing upon Nintendo's intellectual property rights and breaking the DMCA's anti-circumvention and anti-trafficking provisions, Yuzu Emulator and its representatives are accused of causing direct harm and damage. This is assuming that it's under the assumption of violating 17 USC section 1201. Furthermore, Nintendo makes it clear that copies of its games are only permitted to be played on Nintendo Switch systems. Yuzu Emulator is accused of evading technological safeguards despite their implementation, allowing the decryption and illegal play of Nintendo games on non-Nintendo platforms. In conclusion, emulation stands at the intersection of legal and ethical considerations, evoking passionate arguments both for and against this practice. The emulation proponents perpetuate the notion that it can help preserve older games by providing intuitive ways to play said titles that would otherwise be lost due to out-of-production hardware and or being scarce to come by. Emulation opponents, however, have legitimate worry about the moral and legal ramifications of the practice. Emulation frequently walks on a tightrope legally between fair use and copyrighted infringement. The DMCA and copyright law may also impose legal consequences on the unauthorized reproduction and distribution of copyrighted games through emulation, even though the fair use doctrine permits legal use of copyrighted material for specific purposes such as research or critique. Case studies such as Dolphin and Yuzu exemplify the complexities surrounding emulation. Although Dolphin emulators used the proprietary ISO keys, drew legal attention from Nintendo, the program was intended to help educators analyze Nintendo's hardware design. Therefore, it's up to the end user to discern what is legally and ethically tenable when it comes to the usage of emulation software.